we want to recognize Robert Cunningham, who's here with us from New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. He's one of our most important sponsors who's providing us with the refreshments and the snacks. So thank you very much, Robert. Appreciate that. Our next is going to be a Port Maritime Security Panel. It's going to be headed by Mike Pettit. Mike is the Ventura County Chief Information Officer. That's the IT guy that keeps everything running for everybody. And there's a lot of employees and a lot of IT there at the county to look after. Mike is from Los Gatos, but he wised up very early and came down to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and moved to Ventura County, lives in Ojai today. He's got 4 beautiful daughters, and we're just glad to have him here. He's in charge of a lot of very important things with the county, and Mike will come up now and introduce our panel speakers. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you very much, Will, and glad that all of you could make it here this morning. I think you'll find a lot of interesting material in this panel session, and we've got a great panel for you today. So just want to introduce them by name and position. I'll share a little bit more detail about them as we get into the individual panel presentations. But first of all, we have Commander Casey here with the Coast Guard. We have Brian Sleva, Sergeant Brian Sleva with the Ventura County Sheriff. I'm sorry, Dennis. Sorry, Dennis.
Brian.
Dennis. And then we have Brian Dilley with Ventura County Fire. He's Battalion Chief. And then we have Special Agent Bob Shirley with the FBI. And Deborah Powers, who's the chair of the Naval Counter IED Knowledge Network. And Bill Passage, who's the aviation chief with the U.S. Coast Guard R&D Center. He's a civilian involved with the Coast Guard. All right, so before we jump into the panel details, I wanted to frame some of the influences that are affecting maritime safety and security today, and then talk briefly about at the county how we use technology in that environment. So just to share some points on that, I want to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of events and influences going on in the maritime environment. First of all, in the maritime environment, maritime trade, 90% of the world commerce travels by sea. As we know, most of the planet's covered by water, so there's a huge domain there for maritime involvement. And the majority of our population in the world lives relatively close to the maritime environment. Statistically, maritime trade is growing. The IHS Corporation predicts that total seaborne trade will exceed 10 billion metric tons. That's a lot of freight being traversed over our ocean ways. And containers shipped annually will reach 150 million by 2017. And then $592 billion in cars will make their way across the oceans by 2017. And many of those landing right here in this port of Wyoming. Statistically, depending on where you fall in your thinking, some researchers think that the Northwest Passage may open up. If you look at this picture, it's kind of the U.S. turned sideways, but if the polar ice deposits continue to recede, there's some scientific research that believes that ocean-going traffic to the west coast will use that route. That represents about a 30% reduction in the distance traveled by ocean-going vessels in getting trade goods from the east to the west. So if that happens by 2040, we'll see a lot more trade coming through that route rather than having to go around South America and Africa. We're also seeing a trend in bigger vessels. So right now, stats show that there's over 146 vessels on order that have the ability to hold 10,000 plus cargo units. If you're not familiar with the term TEU, that's a maritime term used to count how many 20-foot containers can go on a cargo vessel. So the largest container ships are just over 18,000 containers, and the enormous 24,000 24,000 TEU vessels are in the works. So we're talking about a lot more product being shipped on ships in the coming years ahead. These represent massive vessels in the ocean. And when you have more product on more ships, that means more value on that ship. The cargo aboard a 24,000 container ship would represent more than $2 billion in value. So what are some of the maritime influences from the bad? You're all familiar with this picture. We have pirates. Just some stats on pirates. This is an infographic on some of the attacks. Total number of attacks in 2014, 245. The good news is the number of attacks, if you look from 2009 to 2015, is actually receding. That's largely due to our efforts as a nation to intervene in that area. So the good news is it's arguably getting safer. And that's through much of the efforts and the types of technologies that you see here today. So some positive news, but still 245 in a year is a lot. Some other interesting stats and influences: virtually all population growth in the world is in the world's poorest countries. So when you talk about some of the social issues that represents maybe criminal influence, we're talking about impoverished nations, large populations, with maybe a lot of idle time on their hands looking for things to do. And that's influenced by a host of bad characters and influences. You might have extremist groups, you have poverty and hunger, human trafficking, and then of course illegal substance trafficking. And just to represent that, this is a graph from 2011 that documents suspect maritime activity between South America and the tip of Central America. And you can see those are just the ones that were classified as known suspect events. There are largely more that may not be. But we've seen here on our west coast even an increase in the number of ponga boats and things like that proceeding up the west coast. So just to give you an idea of some of those influences in our environment. And then, of course, we have ugly influences really near to home right now. We've had just the recent pipeline spill off the Santa Barbara Channel, and other maritime natural disasters between weather-related conditions, vessel emergencies, etc. So there's a number of influences that pour into the maritime environment here off of our coast. And that's really some of the driving force for these technology expos, to see how we can respond better, how we can be better informed. From a county perspective, we have a number of agencies that are involved in maritime emergency response. We have our sheriff, of course, our fire protection district, Office of Emergency Services that coordinates all of these major events. And then we also have maybe some typically unanticipated organizations, like our Public Works organization that may be responsible for cleanup after a natural disaster or something to that effect. And then in more massive casualty incidents, we have public health and our healthcare network. So for us, technology is very important. One, to inform the responders about what is the nature of the incident, what are the details and the data around that incident. Communication. Technology is to help communicate that information about these events out to all of these first responders. And then coordinating that response. What types of apparatus? How many individuals do we need in terms of human resources to respond? And then evaluation. One of the things that's very important, just like is done with this exercise here, is data coming out of the exercise. How can we improve our response in the future? So technology has been very, very important for us. You'll hear from the panelists today. We're also increasingly employing new technologies in terms of sensors. We've got unmanned aerial vehicles, we've got new video camera type technology, and a number of other technologies that are increasingly becoming valuable for us. Also, our data network, how we get that information to these first responders is critical. We use a combination of technologies, both wireless and wired, microwave for data, wireless point-to-point communications. We have localized Wi-Fi networks, and then a lot of cellular technology as well. So many different technologies, sensors, etc. But that's why it excites me to have the panel that we have here today, who represent a lot of the different practical application of those technologies. And so in getting into that, I'd like to start with Commander Casey here of the U.S. Coast Guard. Let me tell you a little bit about his background. Commander Casey here is the Chief of Response responsible for the Coast Guard search and rescue, law enforcement, pollution response, and port security operations in an area of responsibility that includes more than 350 miles of California's coastline, its ocean waters, and out to 200 miles offshore, and the nation's largest port complex. So we're very thankful to have him here today. As you can imagine, he's been a little tied up with the recent events here on our West Coast. So thank you for joining us, and I'd like to invite Casey to tell how they use technology in his capacity at the Coast Guard.
All right, thanks, Mike. On behalf of Captain Williams, who's actually up at the oil spill off Santa Barbara right now, thanks for having the Coast Guard here. We really appreciate being here. Just a quick story about this time last year when Captain Williams took over as captain of the port and I as the chief of response. We had a vessel, a barge that grounded up off Point Conception. Most of you probably didn't hear about it, which is a good thing. It was about a 145-foot barge filled with the solution, and we got a call in the middle of the night that a barge had grounded basically in the vertical position off Point Conception, and obviously our hearts dropped because typically barges are, when we think of barges, they're carrying crude or some type of petroleum product. So we asked, and hey, it happened to be, it had a cargo of a sodium solution and basically a concentrated seawater. So the first thing was like, so like, well, not so fast. It just happened to ground less than a mile from a pipeline that came from one of the offshore oil wells into Point Conception. We're like, well, hopefully we got a tug out there right away, and everything is good. And then we're trying to solve the problem. Well, the next issue was any of the closest place where this thing could potentially go into safe haven was off Point Conception, which just happens to be a marine protected area and one of the most environmentally sensitive places in California. Long story short, we were able to about 2 weeks, we were able to salvage the vessel, get it out, and both of us kind of looked at each other and was like, man, we just avoided a huge one. Because that's really where one of our biggest vulnerabilities is ships translating through off Santa Barbara through the Channel Islands, and a lot of ships carrying a lot of oil are going through there. So, fast forward a year later, not in a million years did we think something that would come from the land, a pipeline, would break and spill 20,000 gallons of oil into this incredibly sensitive and pristine coastline. So it's been absolutely a huge challenge, and I think it's going to go on for a long time. We still got 1,000 people on the beach cleaning up rocks right now, spending a considerable amount of effort on this. But we're committed to seeing this till the end and making sure we get those beaches back to where they are. So trust me, I'm more than happy to be talking about port security here today. So just quickly, from the Coast Guard's perspective, where I think we have the most value is having that multi-layered level, pushing out the border or the coastline as far out as possible. There's several means where we get information, and go so far as the origination point, where we have folks that actually visit ports in foreign countries and are inspecting the safety and security of the ports and those vessels out there on a regular basis to ensure the stuff that's where it's originating is going to be safe when it gets here. And that's really, I think, a value that the Coast Guard adds quite a bit in terms of the Federal Maritime Security Coordinator's perspective, and also to the folks in the ports. Along with that, there are several things along the way as it transits across, and mechanisms we can use to monitor the shipping traffic out there. We do use a risk-based approach to that, and there's several analysis and models and matrices we come together to determine which vessels we should take a look at, and where those risks are. We also have partnered with some of the communities out there and some of the colleges. Protect is something that came from a program they're using at the airport in LA. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of that, but it's a game theory based model where we use game theory and randomization to determine where our vessels are going to patrol. It's actually been really useful, I'd say, in the Port of New York, as well as on the East Coast at the Chesapeake Bay, and then we've also implemented, we're the only place in the West Coast that's using it, and I think our guys on the ground that are driving the boats have said it works really, really well. The next slide is just, and I think Kristen Deek has said it best. I mean, it really is an all hands on deck effort in this. There are so many things that go into this. There are so many constituencies involved in any kind of port. that it's just, we have to work together in this, and really all these things have really already been addressed here this morning, which I think is great. Really, we're from, again, on the Federal Maritime Security Coordinator's perspective, and as the saying goes, if you've seen one port, you've seen one port. Really, I think one of the big challenges is finding this all-encompassing port security, piece of technology that works everywhere, and especially from the Coast Guard's and the federal perspective. We go through the acquisitions process and through our R&D center that they do a lot of great stuff, but every port is different, and what the folks there have, when you look at a port of LA and Long Beach that have millions and millions of dollars in port security grants as well as through their own, and they have the ability to reach out and gain access to a lot of technologies that maybe a smaller port cannot. And it's something, and what a dichotomy in this area in terms of that large sucking sound from the port of LA Long Beach and then coming up here, which is a very important port. It's a mixed complex, but it's just a very, very different animal altogether. So, one of the things that we found, and I've had the chance over the 3 years in LA to see tons and tons of technology solutions, and some absolutely fascinating things are out there, is really how you tie that into something that allows the Federal Maritime Security Coordinator and all the partners that are in charge of security to use it together and use it enterprising where it adds value to the person that's making decisions, making sure it's able to be networked into that. And I think that's something that, like I said, I've seen very, very tons of radar products and a lot of other things, but how it fits into the Coast Guard or the local systems is really, really an important step in that. And, I think you guys know that as well as anyone. Persistent sensors is something that, I can't say enough about how important something like that is. I don't know where the technology is to meet that. The small boat threat is a huge one as far as we're concerned. We have 4 87-foot coastal patrol boats that patrol 350 miles of shoreline. When you compare that to the radar signature or the visual signature of a Ponga boat that's 30 feet long, you're getting about 2 to 3 mile radius from an 87-foot patrol boat. So, you stick that, it doesn't even show up on the map of California or our AOR. So we try to be as effective as we can, but without persistent sensors or maritime domain awareness patrolling, which is through either our C-130s or even, I kind of hate to use the dirty word drones because it tends to bring up a lot of conversation, but that's something that I think is pretty important to that. The other thing is, in terms of the sensors, what we've seen is there's been a lot of great stuff, and we've been able to recreate a lot of, the Panga threat's the easiest probably thing to bring into account, where we've been able to recreate a radar feed that's been recorded and say, oh yeah, there was the Panga, we saw it go right by. Well, nobody was watching, or nobody understood that, or no one saw that with enough time to warn the folks on the shore or the responding agencies to make a response. So not an easy solution to have, but how we can integrate into that to systems where it could recognize that early enough for us to respond. And then the final couple things is, refining coordination, which I think David, I think said it well in terms of exercises and doing all those things together. And then, defense tactics are things that we can use to actually stop the threats coming in. Or there's a lot of things out there. I don't think any of us have agreed on what's the right thing. So anyway, thank you much.
Thank you very much. So, Casey, from your perspective, how does the port and its stakeholders enhance maritime safety, security, and response?
Sure. Well, certainly in terms of things like this, that the Coast Guard and a federal agency just doesn't have the time or the wherewithal, I think, to be able to pull off, just because of the way we purchase and buy technology. At the local level, we don't necessarily have the authority or the ability to do that. So through mechanisms like this, through the ports, through the partners, the state and local partners, they're able to bring together a lot of funding on a local level a lot better than the Coast Guard can. So we absolutely value our partners and our ability to come to these events and learn what else is out there, so we can send that up our chain of command and have time to look at and evaluate things that will help the Federal Maritime Security Program.
Great, thank you very much. What we're going to do is we're going to hear from all of the panel members, and then we'll open up for some general questions as well, if you have any specific questions for any of the panel members at the end, just in the interest of time. So now, speaking of the dirty word drones, I want to introduce to you Sergeant Sleva. He's with the Ventura County Sheriff's Department. He's a 22-year veteran. He's served in commands in both crime prevention, in fraud detection, in detention, in patrol. A lot of law enforcement experience represented in his career. And for the last 3 years, he's been working in the Ventura County Sheriff's Unmanned Aerial Vehicle, we call them UAVs, a little better term, unit, and he's one of their chief pilots for UAVs, and has also served to help the Ventura County Sheriff's Department become one of the only law enforcement agency in the state of California that is licensed to use UAVs. So many law enforcement agencies in the state are looking to the Ventura County Sheriff and how they accomplish that feat. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dennis to tell how they're using technology in the maritime domain.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So my name's Dennis Sleva, and yes, the dirty word drone is not allowed to be used in our team. We do not use that at all. So about 3 years ago, one of the commanders came up to me and said, "Hey, Dennis, you have a license. You're a licensed pilot. We'd like you to start to look at developing a team to use UAVs in law enforcement." Okay, and UAVs are real new technology, especially with law enforcement. So one of the requirements that we found with the FAA, that they said, hey, if you guys are going to fly anywhere near an airport, you know, and anybody here familiar with this area, we have Oxnard, Camarillo, Magoo, you have to have a licensed pilot who's going to be in two-way communications with our ATCs, the control tower. Okay. So they said, hey, you got your license, let's start developing a team, let's start looking at this technology, what we can use it for. So the main intention that we got into this whole field was for search and rescue to assist our Sheriff's Air Unit. With that said, we found that we had probably better results using this type of technology for looking at suspicious packages, being able to send our quadcopters, known as the Cube, it's an AeroVironment product, being able to send a quadcopter to a hazmat situation where we can't get anybody to look at what type of spill we have, and look at any suspicious bomb devices or anything like that that we just can't get close to, that maybe we can get a little better air visual look at than our bomb team here. So we looked, and the FAA said, all right, they allowed us to apply for what they call a COA. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. That's they call a Certificate of Authorization. That takes about 6 or 7 months just to get a training COA, which allows you to train with your quadcopter in specific areas in your jurisdiction. So we applied for that, we got that, and once we got that, we trained for about a year using the Cube. And once you do that, the FAA will come out and evaluate your program, and will basically give you the go-ahead to use it or not to use it. That's a 2-day process. They look at all your manuals, they look at your pilot logbooks. In order to fly it, you don't necessarily have to have a pilot's license, but you do have to have an observer and someone flying it who has a medical certificate from the FAA. So there are some requirements, and like I said, before we got our jurisdictional COA, they told us you're going to have someone in two-way communications who is a licensed pilot with ATC. We applied for our certificate for their jurisdiction, and lo and behold, the FAA came out and said, guess what? You're not allowed to fly what we call Class Delta airspace, which is Camarillo, Magoo, and Oxnard. Well, I don't know if you guys are from this area, but that's the majority of our jurisdiction. So now, guess what? Now we're not flying. The only places that we're flying in is Thousand Oaks, Moore Park, and North Ventura, and Fillmore. So, with that said, we are currently working with the FAA to get that resolved, and we're speaking with the manager at Camarillo Airport, who is really actually speeding along the process, and within, I would say, the next month or two, we're going to be able to fly in those areas without any problem. Now, here's what's interesting, is because of that, if you take the Class Delta airspace, if anybody knows Freedom Park, which basically sits right next to Camarillo Airport, any of you can take a vehicle, air vehicle, and fly it without any authorization from the FAA. Okay, you can go in your own backyard, launch this thing, and you don't need any approval from the FAA. We do. Okay, if we fly our vehicle over any residences and there's nothing that we consider, or the call out's not exigency, okay, that's going to require a search warrant. Okay, someone flying a Cessna, someone flying their drone over someone else's house doesn't need a search warrant. We do, unless it's exigency. These are just the rules. This is a learning process for everybody. We are, and I'm happy to say, we are the first one, and he mentioned it, we're the first one in the state of California, the first law enforcement agency to be granted a COA. So as you can tell, every law enforcement agency in California is looking at us to see where we go with this. The courts are looking at it. So it's kind of a gray area. It's going to be a big learning curve for us. We're excited about it, but we're taking it in baby steps. Since we've gone live about, 4 or 5 months ago, Darren, we've had one call out. He's displaying the video right there. It was to assist county fire up in the Ojai area with a fire, a brush fire, and we were just going out looking at hot spots and seeing what type of capabilities this thing had at night. It does have infrared. We can put one of our guys in one of our training scenarios under a bridge, fly over the bridge, light them up, and you can see them walking under the bridge under the shadow. So it's got some good technology. We're really excited about it. As far as maritime though, like I said, this is brand new. We cannot fly over the ocean. Our COA does not allow that yet. However, that is just about a 2 or 3 day process with the FAA to allow us to do that. You probably know our quadcopter, if you guys want to come back and take a look at it later, it doesn't float. So we're not going to use it over the ocean just yet. However, we are currently in the process of filling out a new COA for a new aircraft that we're looking at, and it's created by AeroVironment. It's called the Puma. The Puma does float. It's a fixed wing aircraft. So we're looking at that. We're excited about that. Once we get that approved, that should only be like a couple months. We're going to test that, fly it over the ocean, see what the capabilities are, and just looking at the endless possibilities and find out where this is going. But like I said, we almost didn't make it today. We had a second call out since we've been active of a barricaded subject in the Simi Valley area. But he was happy to come out once he found out that the cube is going to come out and look for him. So, but with that said, we're looking forward to the future. We're looking at the endless possibilities, especially with the maritime venture, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Dennis. So, Dennis, from your perspective, what's the single business issue for the Ventura County Sheriff, and how do unmanned aerial vehicles help address that?
So the single biggest issue is basically the big key word for law enforcement is ILP, which is intelligence-led policing. So we're looking at this type of technology to assist us, the ground guys, SWAT teams, bomb teams, in visual observation, visual surveillance, search and rescue to assist our air unit. So the biggest business with this is going to be a multitude of looking for lost hikers, looking for marijuana grows, looking at suspicious packages, assisting the fire department with hazardous materials. So that's going to be the biggest business issue. I think right now it's going to be more over the ground than the ocean until we get trained and find out what the Puma can do. But as of right now, that's going to be our biggest issue, is looking at, hey, how can we assist the fire department, other agencies as well. Simi Valley's looking at getting one, but for right now they're going to use us to see where this technology goes. So really excited about that, and I think it's just going to be, like I said, it's endless possibilities, and it's going to really help us in the long run.
So I've read some future thinking research that predicts that ultimately every patrol deputy will have their own UAV that's kind of over their shoulder instead of a wearable body cam, and it'll follow them wherever they go, and then they can deploy it unneeded. Have you heard anything like that, and how far off do you think that could be?
For us, that's going to be pretty far out. But talking about that, we just started testing the body cameras. So our agency's kind of following up with that right now. We have 2 deputies at each station who are wearing the body camera and doing daily evaluations. But you know, with the future, who knows where these things will go. We actually looked at one UAV. We didn't end up purchasing it, but we looked at one that would actually follow you as you walked around. So if you were looking for a lost hiker, you didn't have to land it and pack it up and hike to the next spot. You could actually walk through the mountainside, walk through the trails, and the UAV would just follow you. So.
Great, thank you very much. Well, talking about the other side of response now, I'd like to introduce you to Brian Dilley. He's the battalion chief over operations with Ventura County Fire. He's had a rich 31 years with Ventura County Fire, and one of the duties he's currently tasked with is coordination of shipboard and marine firefighting and training and development for the department. He's also currently involved with the LA and Long Beach Marine Firefighting Work Group, and they meet quarterly at the U.S. Coast Guard Station in Long Beach. He's also involved with the conduct of the multi-agency shipboard fire training in conjunction with Coastal Trident. So welcome, Brian. Thank you for joining us today, and why don't you share about how you use technology in fire?
Okay, thank you for having me here. It's my pleasure to address you guys today on what the fire department's doing. Currently, just to review, we are currently involved for the last 2 weeks. We've had large interagency training here in the Port of Long Beach. Last week we started 3 days of classroom. We brought an instructor down that we've used for the last 15 years from Canada, who's a boat captain, and he has a company where he teaches marine firefighting. So the last 3 days, including today, we've actually been out at the port yesterday and the day before. We conducted some operations, multi-agency operations on board one of the Del Monte vessels, the Horncap, that was in port for the last 3 days. They were gracious enough, between the coordination of their company and the port and our agencies, we were able to get all the firefighters on board their ship over 2 days, do some live training as far as, like, we had a simulated fire in the engine room that was contained by the crew, and they had some missing crewmates on the boat, so we went on there and rescued them and performed some of the marine firefighting SOPs that we've been practicing over the last couple weeks, and it was a really interesting and a good challenging exercise for all of our people. Today's the last day of that, and we're going to be working on one of the ro-ros that's out here, so if you're out there, you might see us conducting that later on this afternoon when the ship comes in. How we use technology, I mean, I just got to remind everybody, like the firefighters, I've been around long enough. When I first came here, there wasn't, technology wasn't even really probably a word, and now it's become more and more a part of our everyday lives, and currently, for the last few years, we've been integrating more technology into our operations, but we're still having that problem with the transition of, we see ourselves as the boots on the ground. The majority of the stuff that we do is medical emergencies, structure fires, hazmat calls, USAR, very little in the maritime world, but when we get it, it's that low frequency, very high risk type of situation, so it's something that we really have to be trained on. And over the last few years, we've gone to mobile computers in our fire engines that was one of our first lines of technology, besides obviously our radios, mobile and handheld radios that we have on all of our apparatus. In the recent time, we've had an upgrade of our mobile handheld radio, or our handheld radios, to a nicer package. Currently, one of the things that's been going on and transitioning with that is we have a multitude of radio channels that we can use. We have all the different agencies that respond in this county. If we have an incident down here at the port, as we saw in our training yesterday, we have Ventura County, Ventura City, Oxnard City, Port Hueneme Harbor Patrol, Port Hueneme Police, the Federal Bureau of Investigations. We'll have the Harbor Master. You name it, we've got up to 9 or 10 different agencies, and we all have to be able to communicate and coordinate, so that becomes our ongoing challenge of anything else. But our mobile computers have allowed us to be able to have some good intel. We've developed our software program on there to where we have full CAD for dispatching the closest unit to whatever the emergency is. We can track our units. We can map right down to the single address of a house or the port. We also have other PDF documents that I can show you on my iPad here that's on the Apple TV, where we have like diagrams of the different places that we go to, like the Port of Hueneme, Channel Islands Harbor, and Ventura Harbor, where it gives us a little bit better intel of what we're getting into, along with just our normal visits and going on the calls. Just recently, in the last year, the battalion chief level, we have begun using the iPads like I have up here in the front that I'll demonstrate with you. We have some apps on there that are specially made for our fire department. Our VSAT, Ventura Situational Awareness Tool, which I have the cover up here on the Apple TV. That's something that we can use. We primarily have that right now for the wildland incident type of management and intel gathering, but it can be used in a multitude of different ways. If we had a call down here at the port, we can go as far as to draw on this thing, and everybody that's on our system, even other agencies, if LA City or LA County, or if the fire chief of our department needs to let somebody know from the city council or the county supervisor or the state senator or the governor what's going on, he can easily log into the VSAT app, and he can see in real time the information that we're feeding him. Shows where all of our units are placed. We can draw lines of the incident on there and use the different symbiology that we have on there for our incident action plans to kind of update him. In addition to using our iPhones, we have the opportunity to use FaceTime and take pictures and text pictures to our duty chiefs, which for me, in the time I've only been a battalion chief for the last year, but I was a captain for 20 years before that. And that kind of intelligence and that type of knowledge gathering is just, it's invaluable to us. If I can text a picture to somebody and say, hey, this is what's going on, or get on FaceTime and show them what's going on, it's really valuable and it paints a better picture. In the past, we had to get on our radios and talk on the radio, and you want to try to minimize the amount of time you're spending on the radios talking as well. So the mobile handheld, or the handheld radios that we have, some of the challenges that we have with that is just the interoperability with other agencies. Down in LA County, for instance, who we work with quite a bit, they're on a 400 megahertz system and we are not. And then LA City's on an 800 megahertz system and we are not. So we just recently bought a few Motorola radios that are 400/800, and we have those distributed out to chief officers and the fire stations that are along the county border that would be most likely working with those agencies, so that they're able to interoperability with those agencies as well. The other things where we have technology that we use, and we've had this for probably longer than the mobile computers and other things I've mentioned to you, is in our hazmat unit, which should be out here and displayed today, and our USAR equipment. There's all kinds of different technological pieces that they use in there that help them do the job, because that stuff is so specialized and you really need to have technology. Like the hazmat, they've been working off computers and monitoring all the different chemicals that could come into play, and they have their laboratory where they can test stuff and look up the properties, and we can look at the business plans for different businesses that are in the county to see what they're carrying at their place, as long as they've kept that up to date. What I can do here is I'll just show you really quick. This is our VSAT mobile app, and it should log on here, and what it'll do is it'll zoom into the county of Ventura area, and if you'll see those little the little marks that are on the screen there, basically those are calls and those are units. If we zoom in closely, we can drill down and see exactly what it is that we're looking at there. I believe the green markings on there are units, and this is always sketchy as far as how it works with the Wi-Fi. But the little green squares are units, and then the little blue squares are also units. They're just in different, that tells us the status of the unit right now. If it's a green unit, that means it's available for response, and if it's another color, that will depend on our CAD system. But we can actually look at this in different views. We can get on here and look at it in a road map view, aerial view, or we can change it to a topographic view. I can get on here and draw in fire lines or incident lines so that we can better brief our partners out there and our fire chief, and he can let everybody that needs to know about it. As well as one of the other things we have on here is VCAD. This is basically currently the calls that are going on in the county right now, so I can access that. I can drill down to a particular call and get some more details about what's going on with that call. And then the last thing I wanted to show you on that was this is the mobile computer CAD dispatch app for what we actually have in every one of our fire engines. So when we go to a call, this just recreates that on my iPad. I can actually go en route from this room. If I got dispatched to a call right now, I would have a call slip come up on my screen similar to that. And then what I would do is I would just hit that yellow en route button, and that would change my status. When I got on scene, I'd push the red button. That should give me my on scene. That allows us to have our metrics for our efficiency and how fast our response is and how things are working out. This will give me different information on the screen. I can also get down to, like, this particular incident that this unit's going on has a PDF tactical to give them more definition, so we can look down there and look at the drawing. This is one of the more primitive drawings that we have. I can show you one that we have of the Port of Hueneme, which is much more detailed. If I could just get my big finger to stop that right there. We can also map the call. We just hit the map button, and then if I drill down to the view, basically that flag right there, those flags on the screen, that's where calls are at. The little blue and pink icons that are on there, those are the units that responded on that call, and it'll track them wherever they're driving. So it's a really elaborate system. You can see that Medic Engine 3 is moving right now, and if I drill down to quarter-mile view on this, it actually gives me the addresses of each one of the places. So in the port here, what we have, just to kind of sum this up, I can show you we have our tactical for the port. This is our Port of Hueneme tactical. We can zoom in on this to get more detail. What we do is we draw in where the fire hydrants, fire protection are, something about the building, things that are important to our guys' situational awareness. You'll notice we have the wharfs and all the berths marked so that if we get a call and it comes in that way, we know where to go. This gives it's a little bit more defined than the map is, so that just gives us that extra situational awareness. We produce these things, we draw them, and then we have them loaded on here in a PDF and added to the call. So if any address that's on that picture right there gets a call, this thing will load on the computer, so it'll be accessible to us. And then we also have a diagram on here that you can go to that shows a couple of the diagrams of the ships that frequent the port, so that if we go to an incident like that, we have something to start with before maybe we get the vessel plan from the chief officer.
Great, thank you very much. Brian, so last year you had a mass casualty exercise here, and this year you're working a drill last year. This year you're doing a drill on a shipboard fire. Are there any other areas of preparedness that you're looking at from the fire protection and first aid?
I appreciate that. Yes, absolutely. Like, it keeps coming up in all the drills that we had last year and the drills we're having this year every day. I think the number one thing that the personnel, we have an after-action review every day, and we have course evaluations of what's going on. And what seems to come up more than anything else is the communications difficulties that we have. One of the other difficulties is usually we're working on a minimum of 2 channels to start off, and then if we integrate something from the marine environment into that, then we're going to add marine channels to that. So it gets to be a little bit difficult from that standpoint to monitor and keep coordination with all the different radio channels and all the different agencies. So also the situational awareness gathering for us, coming down to the port, making frequent visits, working with our partners to keep our relationships solid so that we can come down here and get on ships and go around the port and work with everybody to get a better situational awareness, because of the fact that things are so infrequent as far as having a maritime emergency for us, but when it does happen, it's going to be significant. The interagency coordination and planning and special emergencies that they might have down here, anything at the port to me is going to be special, but things like hazmat, if we had a terrorism incident or had a USAR technical rescue, we were just approached yesterday by the port partners to have a drill with them how to get one of their people out of that 420-foot crane that they have over there. So they need to do that, keep their certification up. We've done it on their 380-foot crane before, so we're going to have to come out here and get somebody out of their crane. We've actually gotten somebody out of the other one on a real emergency. So those are some of the things that are pressing with us right now.
Very good. Thank you for that valuable insight into your operations and how you use technology. Well, now I'm excited to have Bob Sherrill, Special Agent with the FBI, share with us. He brings over 25 years of experience in his field, and currently Mr. Sherrill serves as the Senior Team Leader for the Los Angeles FBI Underwater Search and Evidence Response Team, known as USERT. This is a 16-member team comprised of technically trained special agent investigators. They specialize in underwater search of evidence for FBI investigations, in addition to state and local law enforcement agencies. Mr. Sherrill's team is one of only 4 teams in the FBI that respond to search requests for matters throughout the United States and international locations when requested. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you for inviting me today to say a few words and tell you about how my experience with the FBI has seen technology over the years. As Mike had mentioned, I'm coming up on my 25th year of the FBI. I can still remember when I was going over, my background and thinking of some things with respect to technology. I still remember the first cell phone that I had issued to me when I was a new agent, and aside from the size, and it had a home-like feel with a cord and a big old battery. I remember thinking that it would be nice to have something a little more portable like this, and now I carry 2 of these around that are basically home computers. So I've kind of had a first row seat with the Bureau as far as seeing how technology has advanced over the years, and see how it's now cyber is kind of the next big thing that's going to be is already here, as most people probably have already heard. With the data breach that is actively being investigated by with OPM right now, and some of the security issues there, this is a problem that's not going to go away anytime soon. In terms of technology, with respect to the Bureau, in my experience, the first computers, I was hired under a paperless system. The technology we were using back in 1990 was a dictation machine and a typewriter. Obviously, we've come quite a bit as far as that goes. In my current capacity as the Senior Team Leader for our Underwater Search and Evidence Response Team, we do a lot of training with our state and local partners in the port complex of Los Angeles, and do similar type exercises often on an annual basis to maintain the connections and the partnerships. We are constantly looking for new technology to enhance our capabilities to make our underwater diving and our divers be safer and more effective in our mission. As noted by Mike in his introduction, my team is kind of a smaller program for the FBI. We often get called into other areas. We're based in the Los Angeles team that I have is the West Coast team. We have a team in New York, the same size, a team in Miami, and a team in the Washington, D.C. area. Overall, we're all one program. We kind of pool our resources on an as-needed basis. One of the examples in recent knowledge that I can think of in terms of utilizing some of the technology we have available now with our sonar equipment is we were asked to go to Atlanta, Georgia for a boating accident about 2 years ago. And it was particularly a tragic event. It was a family that had 2 sons that were killed by a drunk boater. And the first child was in a life jacket. It was at night, and he had been floating after the boat was hit. His older brother, who was 13, was not wearing a life jacket, and he basically got knocked out and probably died instantly and went to the bottom. As most people, if you're not in the diving community, you wouldn't have an appreciation. Lake Lanier is huge, and it was basically all man-made. The issues that weren't relevant when they were flooding the canyon that made the recreational lake, what they wound up doing, a lot of it was forest areas. They basically trimmed these plus 100-foot trees down to about 75 or 80 feet, flooded the lake to a water column of about 130 feet, 135 feet in certain places. So you had literally a forest of trees to obstruct searching. The local teams there, when we arrived, were still on station searching for this victim. We were able to, with some of our sonar equipment, able to locate a piece of the boating debris in about 3 days. And because of the water depth and the conditions, we wound up utilizing one of our ROVs to basically go down and get on station, where we were able to splash divers once we identified the location, so that we didn't have to have the divers underwater any more than necessary. So it made it for a much safer experience. Some of the training things that are ongoing and continue to evolve with my dive team. We do a lot of nuclear rad screening with our law enforcement partners in the LA, Long Beach area. And we're continuing to try to identify gaps and help streamline the information that go from one agency to another. And a lot of the applications that probably cross all of our programs here, as the other panelists have, would reflect that these little smartphone apps that continue to evolve just make our jobs easier.
Great, thank you. So, Bob, as the lead agency responsible for countering and investigating acts of terrorism in the United States, how can technology be used to increase the effectiveness of your agents and support your mission? You've talked about some of the ROV response. Are there any other technologies that you're investigating to assist with your mission?
Sure, there's lots of it. Some of the guys that are on my team, they're primarily investigators on criminal squads or cyber squads or counterterrorism squads. One of the agents in my program was involved in the Sony breach investigation. He's a cyber agent, and staying ahead of the bad guys, if you will, in terms of our ability to identify, flaws in our security and patch them is going to be something that primarily is an ongoing thing, I think. So I'd say the cyber threat is the biggest. The other threats, from the foreign governments, the state sponsors of terrorism, and the non-government organizations involved in terrorism, in terms of continuing developing our partnerships with both domestic and international partners, I think will be an area that will find ourselves increasing our capabilities. In terms of the telephone technology, that's obviously that gets widespread media attention. Regardless of your point of view, it's one of those things that is going to continue to evolve, and our ability through the intel gathering that's needed to identify these homegrown radicals before they actually commit any terrorist acts or something that is going to be of the utmost importance.
Are you anticipating, are you seeing any new threat activity, maybe in cybersecurity regarding vessel control systems and things like that?
I think there's a number of exercises that we do, but I can't think of any specific ones that haven't already been mentioned by one of the other panelists in terms of the Ponga boat issue. That's something that is a challenge. It's a big ocean out there.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Sherrill. So now we're going to hear from Deborah Powers. She's the chair of the Naval Counter IED Knowledge Network, and Deborah is representing over a 30-year body of knowledge for us today, with much of her experience in DoD research, development, test, and evaluation. And one of the things I appreciate about what Deborah's going to share today is a little bit different perspective about what technologies are our enemies using. So thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for having me. I do work, I'm the chairperson for the Naval Counter ID Knowledge Network. I work for Rear Admiral Selby, who oversees 9 naval warfare centers who are focused on Navy research and development. He has about 16,000 employees, and they are mostly scientists and engineers. I always tell folks I have the best job in the Navy, and I really do. I work with Susan McCall here in the very front. The two of us really make up the Naval Counter ID Knowledge Network. We have representatives that participate with us from the 9 warfare centers. And so what do we do? What we do is collaborate. We work across the naval warfare centers to look for technologies to counter IEDs. So when we do that, we have to know what the current threat is, and we have to be able to understand what the warfighters' gaps are and what their needs are. So we look across the warfare centers, we talk to those technologists, and we put together people to help provide solutions to the warfighters' problems. In doing so, we were able to begin working across the Department of Defense and not just the Navy. And so we began working with the Air Force, began working with the Marine Corps, a lot of work with the Marine Corps, and a lot of work with the Army, because most of the current threats that we dealt with were land-based. Although we are looking a lot now into the maritime security threat. Everybody remembers the coal. And we do see more and more activity from the enemy and the small boat. The small boat threat is persistent. It's not going to go away. And so we do see more and more activity from the enemy towards commercial vessels, because they know the Navy is fully aware of what they need to do to determine the intent of what those small boats are. Just like the Coast Guard has its TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures for layered defense, the Navy ships has its TTPs and CONOPS for layered defense. So pretty much we can determine the intent of the small boat. I'm just going to say we have a process for doing that. But commercial vessels generally don't. So we see more and more activity from the small boats towards the commercial vessels. So some of the other things that we do, you mentioned about technologies, and when I think about the technologies, I think about the technologies that we use also to counter the IED threat. But I think more about the enemy's technologies, because our technologies, you know, it's counter, 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 counter. And so I think about, well, what is the enemy doing? And the enemy's watching us and we're watching them. Everything you have out here today, the enemy has. They're really good at what they do. UASs, UUVs, amphibious. I saw one of the best amphibious vehicles, remotely operated amphibious vehicles last week that I've seen yet. Has a payload of about 600 pounds. I'll just let your mind go. You can work with that. UUVs, the same type of thing. So they have access. They're smart. They're internet savvy. The information's out there, and they're using it. And so we just have to be aware of what we do too. Everything we do, they're watching. Everything we do, we're watching them. The remotely controlled vehicles, the enemy understands that it provides increased standoff. Just like it provides us the increased standoff, it provides them the increased standoff capability. See if I can read my writing here. Reach. You know, depending on what it is they want, it gives them extended reach. The other thing the enemy doesn't have to worry about, and the sheriff was talking about it earlier for them, they don't have to work with the FAA, they don't have to work with the federal acquisition regulations, and they don't have to work with the FCC. They have an unlimited spectrum. Their reach can be as far as they want it to go. And in many cases, I found out the other day, I heard someone talk about a reach that just, it blew my mind. Something that we can't do here because of our regulations. They don't care about spectrum management. It's not a problem for them. So, in looking at how is technology enabling, it's really enabling the enemy very, very well. And we can't respond. We can't respond in the way they can respond. They're agile. We're not. Inside the DoD, we are bound by rules and regulations. We can't go to the internet and just buy what we want to buy. And we have all these interoperability issues. We have training issues. You know, we have to make everything work together. So we're slower. And so I do see opportunity for improvement in that area. Secretary Carter's, again, trying to do rapid acquisition. I don't know if we'll ever have a rapid acquisition for our warfighters, but it's certainly a challenge. Let me see what else I got down here. I talked about technology transfer. They're good at it. The bad guys are good at it. And they form their own networks. This is a network. You guys are creating your own networks today. And keep your networks vibrant. Because without an internal vibrant network, you really can't defeat their network. Our networks have to be strong. They have to pump with a lot of energy. And you have to work those acquisitions and rules and regulations, whatever it has, to make your systems work. So remember, they're working their networks too. They're moving out of Afghanistan, some back into Iraq. You see them going to North Africa, Somalia, and they're training. And they're doing technology transfer. They're teaching others how to do what they did successfully in Afghanistan. So as far as technology goes, I mean, it's just always going to be whatever we develop for good, there's a nefarious opportunity for somebody to use it. And they're going to. Let me see what else. Never underestimate them, because they're not underestimating us. So I don't have anything else unless you have something for me.
So you mentioned a number of challenges that we experience. Are you seeing any emerging technology fields or solutions that might help thwart some of those challenges, or that are very effective in addressing some of the attacks from the enemy?
Are you talking about rules and regulations and fast track acquisition? Are you talking about kicking a capability out fast enough to respond?
I think potentially that. So, you know, obviously, maybe certainly electronic workflows and policies and things like that. But any technologies that can be applied to addressing some of those challenges.
A lot of it's policy. Just like the pirate problem that we had for so very long, you know, we couldn't negotiate with bad guys. And so we just changed some policy because we don't negotiate with terrorists. So the pirates would take folks hostages, and they would stay in these horrible conditions for years and years and years. I think some of that, I know some of that policy has currently changed, and I don't know exactly how it's changed, but it makes it easier for us to do some negotiations. A lot of it's policy. For when we did, back in 2005, 2006, recognize that we had the IED problem in Iraq, you know, the federal government stood up JIATO. And that was one way of responding. And we pumped, I don't know, how many billions of dollars into JIATO to respond to the IED. But most of our challenges are our internal structure that we have to work. And then really a lot of it depends on how fast you can help people understand what the problem is. I had a Navy captain present, what I didn't tell you is that we hold 3 meetings a year. And what we do is something similar to what you're doing, but we pull together technologists, we put the warfighter in there, what we have to have a sponsor, somebody with money, and we have to have, and then we put our technologists kind of in a room and we try to link people up so that we can make things happen quickly. And JIATO was a huge sponsor of a lot of those technologies, but most of it's just policy and trying to make people work together. So this Navy captain I was going to tell you about, he was a medical doctor in Afghanistan. He ran the NATO hospital there. And he told us at the get-go that the slideshow he was going to show us was graphic. And if you had a queasy stomach, you probably needed to leave then. And then he had stories behind that slideshow. And I left, when he left, I left out of there and I went to the Admiral and I said, you know, every acquisition person in the government needs to see this slideshow. Every contract person in the government needs to see this slideshow, because that's what you're trying to do. I mean, I know we have rules and regulations for a reason, I understand it, but it might make you stay 10 minutes late, it might make you come in 30 minutes early. If you understood what you're doing, could maybe have saved this life or saved this limb.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you. All right, for our final panelist today, we'll be hearing from Bill Posage. He's the civilian chief of the U.S. Coast Guard Aviation R&D Center. As he told me, he does all things in the air. So we're excited to hear from him. He's been involved with the Coast Guard since 1976. He's a mechanical engineer, and he's been working with the R&D Center since 2003. So Bill, thank you very much for joining the panel today, and we're excited to hear what kind of technologies you're
Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate the invitation and opportunity to participate in the panel. For those that don't know, there's a lot of people in the Coast Guard even that aren't aware of the Research and Development Center, so just a little bit about us. We're a small group of about 100 scientists and engineers located in New London, Connecticut. We are separated into 6 technical branches. I'm the head of the aviation branch. In the audience here is Brian Dolph also, who's part of the surface branch for us. So if you have some follow-up questions, Brian and I will both be around after this. We do get involved in a lot of different technologies for the Coast Guard. We're small, but we're agile and we're responsive for the Coast Guard's emerging needs in terms of technology. In the aviation branch, which I'll talk about specifically, we do a lot of investigation with the dirty word drones. We don't like that word either because it has the wrong connotation, but unmanned aircraft systems is generally what we refer to them as in my world. We started out in unmanned, really getting into unmanned aircraft systems about 8 years or so ago. Our newest cutter in our fleet, the National Security Cutter, it's a 416-foot ship, of which the Coast Guard will have 8 of them in the near future. I think we have 5 underway at this point, or delivered at this point. The ship was designed to replace 12 legacy cutters, but it was designed to be more capable. That capability increase for that ship, for 8 replacing 12, had a lot to do with replacing augmenting the ship's performance with aviation performance through unmanned systems. Those unmanned systems that we had chosen for the ship at the time weren't mature enough yet, and we've been the early program for that we terminated because of cost, schedule, and performance issues back in 2007, and we've been working with the acquisition community to find a suitable alternative to provide that ship with its maritime surveillance needs. We just completed our last evaluation of that back in December, and the Coast Guard is now ramping up a acquisition for providing the ship finally with its unmanned aviation capacity. Of more interest to this audience probably is what we call our RAMPS program. It's a robotic aircraft for maritime public safety. It's an offshoot of a Homeland Security project which was called RAPS, which was robotic aircraft for public safety. We added the M for the maritime portion. What we're doing with that project is we have a series of demonstrations happening. There's actually one happening this week down at Webster Field in southern Maryland, where we've set up a facility to evaluate different systems against Coast Guard mission requirements. There's 11 Coast Guard statutory missions, and with our aviation efforts, we target all 11 of those statutory missions. The RAMPS project has set up a program where, for lack of a better term, an obstacle course, where we'll bring in different systems from different vendors every 3 months and test them against those scenarios, level the playing field for us. So at the end of the day, we end up with like a consumer reports type report at the end, which will tell you what different attributes and capabilities of these systems against those mission requirements. When you go into an acquisition for this capability, you get past the color glossies that are so prevalent in this industry and get down to the heart of what these systems can really do and what types of capabilities match up against which types of mission needs. This is going to be transpiring over the next year and a half, and like I said, we have one demonstration going on this week. The next one will be in October. But the key to that also is it's not just Coast Guards, is we are working in collaboration with Homeland Security and the Science and Technology Directorate. We're involving all of our other agencies within the Department of Homeland Security and also port partners, so local law enforcement and what have you in the project. So more reach out to you guys, get any type of inputs, and there's a welcome for any type of agency that wants to participate in those efforts. We want to get the word out as much as we can, so we get those inputs so we can not only understand what our capabilities needs are, but we can also drive industry towards developing the technology to a point where it's more useful for us. So that's what's going on with that. Other areas, an oil spill is never fortuitous, but what happened in Santa Barbara a month or so ago was actually, we leveraged the opportunity. We planned for our fixed end rotary wing aircraft fleet, our C-130Js, our H-60 helicopters are equipped with sensors. One of the lessons learned from the Deepwater Horizon spill a few years ago offshore of Louisiana was we didn't have a good working model of how our airborne sensors can detect, track, and classify oil on the surface. We had set up a program, an experiment off of the coast of Santa Barbara in the natural oil seeps about 6 months ago to quantify how those sensors can perform and augment the mission to both to detect the oil, classify it, and clean it up. So about 2 weeks ago, I had a team out here doing experimentation with the C-130J and the 60 and some surface forces for ground truth to do that for the oil. Fortunately, in this case, we had the real oil spill, so we had not just the natural seeps, but also the result of an oil spill to quantify that sensor performance. So that's what we do that also out of our group. For search and rescue efforts, all of our rotary wing fleet is equipped with optical and infrared sensors at this point. We outfitted the fleet, but didn't have a real good, really well vetted TPPs about how to use those sensors. We developed over the last 2 years a methodology which is transforming the way we do searches for PIWs, persons in the water, small objects like rafts and small vessels, to do those searches, to increase the search efficiency, to make it extraordinarily more effective in search efficiency and results for that. Other things that you may find interesting that my group is working on, we're finally looking to move beyond pyrotechnic flares for distress signals for stranded mariners. Pyrotechnic flares have a limited shelf life, have a limited operational life of only 3 minutes or so when you have the flare going off, and there's also represents, since they have limited shelf life, a major disposal problem from an environmental perspective. We've done an investigation over the last 2 years to replace those maritime pyrotechnic signals with LED technology, which is extremely promising right now. We're actually we were at the point where we're ready to go into the Code of Federal Regulations and change the requirements for maritime public distress signals. Also, from aids to navigation perspective, I'm going real broad brush there to the type of stuff that we do. Every aid to navigation you see out there for range lights, buoys, and such. When we made the transition from incandescent lights to LEDs, that was done through our laboratory, we call the General Engineering Laboratory Support. So any new technology that's going on there with lighting of ATON technology comes through our office and gets advanced through there. One of the things you pointed up on your slide was the Arctic. We are very heavily involved with the Arctic. We have a program called Arctic Shield, where every year we send a team up to the Arctic, up to the North Slope on the icebreaker Healy to investigate new technologies as ship traffic, cruise traffic, commercial traffic, whatever is going on through the Arctic, the need for more technology to facilitate search and rescue up there, any type of oil spill response, because we do have people starting to drill up on the North Slope, and also for communications. Communications from the North Slope is extremely challenging, so we're always looking into different ways and means of communicating. Not just the physical property of spectrum management and such, but who needs to see what, when they need to see it, and how often do they see it. We're trying to resolve those types of problems. I think that pretty much covers it. There's also other interesting things we do. One of our Coast Guard tactics is for when we have when we're doing an interdiction of a vessel, is we shoot the engines out of that. We have a Hitron squadron on our H-65 helicopters, which uses a 50 caliber munition to shoot the engine. There's been a few incidences over the last couple of years, or last few years, where there's been a couple of fatalities for onboard crews and injuries. We quantified what we actually did an experiment with Sandia National Labs to quantify what the shrapnel patterns of the munition is once we're shooting out an engine, and quantified what the actual lethality and risk zones around that tactic is. And we're actually looking at doing different sizes, going to maybe perhaps smaller munitions when we exercise that project. So that's a broad stroke of what we do. We do a lot of interesting stuff. It's a fun job.
Very good. Thank you for sharing a lot of that information. So, with all the growth of sensors and these monitoring systems, and even the video and other data that you're getting from unmanned appliances or devices, are you seeing this issue that's commonly talked about in the technology field is big data and dealing with that? Are you seeing a lot of growth in that information and challenges in working with that?
Yeah, questions like that, I wish I had our C4ISR branch chief here. I'm familiar with the term big data and the movement of data because you know, all of the service organizations, especially when they came into the unmanned aircraft systems, is management of the data. You know, this I guess one of the misnomers about there is there's anything such thing as an unmanned system. If anything, because you have more data, you're increasing the number of analysts you need to be looking at all this data coming in. It's an incredibly difficult problem getting, you know, who needs to see what, when they need to see it, how much information do they need, how big of a pipe you need between the nodes of your network is are problems we're actively pursuing. You know, a lot of different means. You know, there's also the protection of data, encryption technology, which we have to incorporate into all of those links. Makes it exacerbates it. So we work very closely together with C3SEN, TISCOM, my C4SI branch that we have at the center to coordinate all that effort to get an understanding of who's seeing what, when they're seeing it, and such.
Very good. So a question popped into my mind. You know, when you were talking about these sensors that can detect oil spills, etc., we've certainly seen a lot of growth in this. You know, remote operated vehicles or unmanned vehicles, etc. Is there any testing of like the Roomba for the ocean to clean up an oil spill or anything like that?
Well, our office a few years ago, we pioneered the whole concept of in situ burns. When we actually have an oil spill and we gather the oil together and through booms and then do an in situ burn and such. But I'm not real familiar. Again, I wish Kurt Hansen was here to explain some of the cleanup technologies. But it's a challenge. Deepwater Horizon gave us a unique opportunity to look at different skimming techniques. I mean, we had this massive converted oil tanker there that was that we evaluated during that. Kevin Costner was hanging around on the beach with some technology that he had. It was actually quite effective. So we continually looking at different technologies to actually clean. Oil's difficult though. It's there's no single type of. It's just a varied type of different spills and from the chemical composition of it. There's no one-size-fits-all solution like the Roomba for oil spills. But we continue to look at new technologies for that.
Great, thank you. A couple general questions for the panel. If any of you want to speak to this, if technology could solve one immediate problem in your mission, what would that be? What would that problem be?
I think one of the main ones would be personal accountability systems.
Excuse me. For us, I think the one big major thing would be personal accountability systems. If they could do something that was really good for us to track our personnel when they're in these incidents or wherever they are, their status of their air and their life support systems and stuff like that, that would be something that would be very beneficial to the fire department.
Great, so I got the Apple Watch here, so maybe something like that, monitor their vitals, pulse oximetry, things like that.
Yeah, I'm thinking that's the next thing they're going to hand me, because I've got 2 Apple iPhones, I've got an iPad, so I'll probably get a watch next, and somehow they'll have that figured out.
All right, anyone else have a major problem they'd like to see technology solve?
I say, as far as law enforcement is concerned, officer safety. One of the biggest things that we have are these barricaded subject calls, mentally disturbed persons that are barricaded in a house. Our SWAT team, they can only do so much from the outside, and we're actually looking at technology using UAVs inside a residence, so they can send this UAV inside a residence, do a kind of a look around, and increase officer safety before they even step foot inside the house.
Great. So that kind of dovetails with the next question. For any of our vendors in the room, what, considering the enormous scope of maritime security and safety, what areas would you like to see technology developers focus on? Any thoughts on that?
For us, and does that go along with the question about the pain points for us?
Sure,
Okay,
yeah.
For us, I wrote down a few things. Situational awareness is huge for us. We're the first responders. We're normally going to be the ones that get called 911. It goes right to the fire department, and it usually goes to law enforcement, and it always goes to law enforcement, and it gets to us after that. But we're the ones responding on this stuff first, and sometimes the things we're responding to are maybe outside of our level of training or expertise. So having some better situational awareness capabilities and the sharing of that situational awareness and that intelligence is huge in the emergency environment for both fire and law enforcement. So that would be one of the things. And then the interagency communications and interoperability is a huge point for us.
Great, thank you. Anyone else on the panel want to speak to that? All right, well, we have about 5 minutes left before lunch, but I did want to open it up to the audience here. If any of you have any questions for any of our panel members. Right here.
First question, your consumer reports like that technology that Coast Guard is considering, or are you testing it between ports?
For the ports, we are the Coast Guard organization, so we recognize that we have to work, we're more effective when we work with our port partners. So it is for state agencies, local law enforcement, anybody who wants to participate and give us feedback, because once the reports come out, again, that'll be useful to anybody who's looking to buy. We're also looking to set up a facility since it rapidly, the technology rapidly develops and expands. It follows Moore's law to the T. Every 2 years, we're getting, everything's obsolete. So as it advances, what we're trying to also do is set up a facility that, whether it's the Coast Guard, whether it's a partner agency within Homeland Security, or local law enforcement, state agency, what have you, can try, fly before you buy. So if, get past the color glossy type of scenarios, you're interested in a system against certain mission requirements, you can come to our facility and evaluate that in your own particular scenarios. That'll be transpiring over about the next 2 years or so. And we're actually looking for a facility to set that up in, since we are in New England, we're favoring Cape Cod right now, but we're looking also to see if there's other places that are applicable for that.
Thank you. I think there's a question right behind you. Gentlemen.
Jurisdictions or whatever, you have an issue or a law. Can you tell me is technology taking care of that, or is it helping manage things?
So just to repeat the question for the audience, so the question was, in the multiple response venue, there were oftentimes walls in between the responding agency. Has technology helped to address that interaction?
If I'm copying the question right, and you can rephrase it or just come back but as far as the seams, that's one thing that we are constantly striving for, is this to become seamless, and especially in the maritime world. I mean, in this battalion that I'm in here, our battalion covers stations from Malibu all the way to Piru, and it seems like every incident we go on, we have at least 4 different agencies working on that incident, and they're all to some degree representative. You know, it might be the county's jurisdiction, but we have our partners helping us out in it. So having seamless interactions is key to us. And in the port here, it even gets more magnified. You even have more agencies involved with it. But I'm not so sure about how technology has really assisted with that as much as the interpersonal relationships and the relationship building that we've done. I think our department, I know from Chief Lorenzen and all of the executive staff, they really have opened up our department and our minds and our worlds to reach out and get better relationships going. And the training that we're doing this last 2 weeks is a testimony to that, and the fact that I can go down and be part of a Marine firefighting work group all the way down in Long Beach, and my department doesn't have a problem with that. I think getting to know the people that are coming out there, the players, and not having to meet them for the first time, maybe they know you and you know them, that goes a long ways to breaking down the barriers between the different agencies, and it's helped a lot.
Great, thank you. Question right back here.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. You got another response. Go ahead.
Just real quick, from the maritime perspective, and from the folks that are on the water, we benefit from the Channel 16 spectrum, where it's the international emergency, and with Rescue 21 that just recently come into full capability, we've been able to leverage that for the folks that are operating boats on the water. It's used throughout, so that's a big part of it. But in terms of other responses to actual emergencies, and the Panga thread is another catalyst for something. We found out we couldn't even talk to each other within DHS, let alone for state and local partners. So we did, that's something we've been jumping up and down quite a bit on, and we have what's called a maritime communication system, which now allows us to talk from the Mexican border all the way up to San Francisco, and it's helped tremendously, but there's still a long way to go.
And just one other thing to help out with those barriers, like communication becomes a big problem. And one thing that we've done from the county fire department standpoint is we've also aggressively started working with our partners. For instance, we've given gifted radios to each one of the agencies that are with us around this area. The Coast Guard's got 4 of our radios, so that sure they have all their marine frequencies. We have a lot of their marine frequencies on our radios, but they also have ability to use our radios to talk to us directly, and we're developing that more. We have that also with the Port of Hueneme. The Harbor Master's got a radio with our frequencies on it, and so do the other agencies, fire and police. So it's come a long way. It's been a transpiring thing. It wasn't like this 10 years ago, 30 years ago when I first started, but we're really making some advances in that and really trying to focus on working together and get things done.
For the sheriff, I'm Rick Williams from the Naval Postgraduate School up in Monterey. While your call folks do an awful lot for you here locally, and I really applaud that work, there's other things that happen up in Monterey for the sheriff. A couple years ago, we did a tabletop war game for the Association of Unmanned Vehicles International, looking at the use of UAVs by civilian agencies and how you deal with that. A fairly lengthy report. If you're interested in taking a look at that, the technology has moved ahead. A lot of the issues haven't, particularly the boundary issues. And while we probably didn't come up with answers to all of those, we certainly had some thoughts on that from a variety of folks. You know, the FAA was in the room, vehicle manufacturers were in the room, firefighters from the ground who had just fought California fires were in the room. So we had a fairly broad spectrum of folks. The second thing I would throw out is we produce about 1,200 thesis products every year. And they're done by typically experienced people. People that are returning from flying airplanes, driving ships around the world, doing other things, all services, internationals, and they're all looking for thesis projects that matter. And so if you have a problem you think we could help with, please pick up a card from me and send me a little description of what you're after, and maybe we can help. We can't do them all. It's got to fit their curriculum. But the point is, if we can get a professor and a student interested in your product, we've got somebody that will give you free work on that problem for about 9 months, and they got to complete it before they graduate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, in the interest of time, I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll end up breaking for lunch.
I have a Captain for Casey. I go to a lot of port security conferences and attend these panel discussions. The people who sit in the room tend to be public safety agencies and port authorities. But all the security apparatus that's in our terminals, our private terminals, whether it's the FSOs in a terminal operator or a private terminal that's not even part of a port, are not there. And we, the technology solution providers, don't really even know how to reach them. Now I know that within each sector, you guys, Coast Guard, sort of have this group of people and bring in the FSOs on a regular basis, but we have a really hard time communicating. Do you have any advice?
I think the best mechanism for that is probably through the area maritime security committees. And I know, in terms of, in general, and also there is a Coast Guard facilities branch through Coast Guard headquarters. My best piece of advice to the area maritime security committees, so they can get the word out, and maybe you can make a presentation or talk to several of them. There is every year, I think it's every 2 years, they do have a national AMSC conference at certain places around the country. I think it changes, so that's another way you can probably get the word out to more folks that can bring this back to their local folks.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I know that'll wrap up our panel discussion on behalf of the port and the EDCVC and this Mast opportunity. I want to just, if you'll join me in thanking our panel members for the lively discussion today.
Good, and thank you very much. Lunch today will be brought to us by EDCVC, the Economic Development Collaborative of Ventura County. It's a business resource for companies of all sizes doing business in Ventura County. They were established in 1996, and they promote jobs and economic growth to maintain the county's economic vitality through key programs and services that include training, business consulting, workshops, loans and funding assistance, etc. So that's EDCVC and who they are. When we come back from lunch this afternoon, we'll have a hot wash session for the coastal Trident activities. Remember that there's two things going on today, in Mast and Coastal Trident, and they'll be doing their hot wash this afternoon as well. And there will be more technology demonstrations in this room. We encourage you to visit all of our exhibitors after lunch as well, and we will be doing some tours as well after lunch, so please enjoy lunch.